100 poets, one poem each. Number 15. The poem Kimi ga tame, haru no noni idete, wakana tsumu, waga koromo de ni, yuki wa furitsutsu. For you, I went out into the spring fields and gathered young herbs, and as I gathered, the snow kept falling on my sleeve. 31 syllables, the 15th poem in the anthology of 100. This poem begins with 2 words that change everything that follows. Kimi ga tame. For you, not, look at the spring fields, not, the snow is falling. For you, everything in the poem is addressed to someone. The spring fields are entered for that person. The herbs are gathered for that person. The snow falls on the sleeve of someone who is outside in the cold. For that person, the person who wrote this poem was 54 years old. When he wrote it, he had never expected to be emperor. He was a prince who had lived his long life in the gentle margins of power, who had spent his decades playing music and writing poems and tending his garden and not being the person who ran things. And then at 55, the world changed, and he was emperor. The poet, his name was Emperor Koko, the 58th emperor of Japan, born in 830, died in 887, 57 years old. He became emperor at 55. This is the detail that defines him. Not young, not ambitious, a man who had lived most of his life as a prince with no particular expectation of the throne. He was the 3rd son of Emperor Ninmyo, the same Emperor Ninmyo, whose death drove Sojo Henjo into a monastery. In poem number 12, he had survived his father. He had survived the reigns of his brothers. He had grown old in the courts of other emperors, playing music, writing poems, tending his garden. And then Emperor Yozei was removed, the emperor of poem number 13, the dangerous young man who kept horses in the palace and opened the sacred sword, who was 17 and was removed, and Fujiwara no Mototsune looked at the candidates, the available princes, the men who could plausibly take the throne. He chose Koko. Koko was the choice because he was not dangerous, because he was 55 years old and had spent his life in the gentle margins, because a man who had never sought power was unlikely to fight for it against the minister who gave it to him. This is the calculation, a manageable emperor, the same calculation that had removed Yozei. The late reign, he reigned for 3 years, from 55 to 57, 3 years, and then he died. 3 years is not a long reign, but it was not a bad one. He was a gentle emperor. He loved music. He played the Japanese court zither. He was known for his poetry. He sponsored cultural activities. He was the emperor that the court of his age relaxed around, not the one who opened the sacred sword, not the one who kept horses in the palace, the one who went out into the spring fields and gathered young herbs for someone he loved and noted with the particular attention. of a poet that the snow was falling on his sleeve. While he did it, the young herbs, wakana, young herbs, young greens, the first edible plants of spring, gathered in the early spring, before the full greening of the world, when the fields are still mostly brown, and the new growth is visible, only to someone who knows where to look. The gathering of young herbs was a tradition in the early new year, the 7th day of the first month, the festival of 7 herbs. Young greens were gathered, put in rice porridge, eaten for health, for the year ahead, for the driving out of cold and illness and whatever the winter had brought, that the body needed to put behind it. The young herbs were not only food, they were the first sign, the sign that the earth was alive again, that despite the snow still falling, despite the cold still present, something was beginning, something was pushing through. The herb gatherer was the person who noticed this first, who went into the field before anyone else, who was willing to be cold to find the first thing. The snow on the sleeve. This poem connects to poem number 1, The Emperor in the Autumn Field, the sleeve wet with dew, the continuing, and now the 15th poem, The Emperor in the Spring Field, the sleeve with snow falling on it, the continuing, both emperors, both in fields, both with something falling on the sleeve, both sleeves wet with the season. The first poem is autumn, the dew of a night watch, the solo of someone alone in a field, guarding, waiting. The 15th poem is spring, the snow of an early morning, the act of gathering for someone else. For you, the anthology has arranged these poems so that they speak to each other, across the distance between them, the autumn sleeve, the spring sleeve, the alone, the for you, both wet, both continuing. Kimi ga tame. This phrase appears twice in the 100 Poets, once here and again in poem number 49. Same opening, same 2 words, different poem, different poet, different relationship between the speaker and the person addressed. Take a place the 2 poems far enough apart that they do not immediately connect, but close enough that the reader who is paying attention will notice. The first Kimi ga tame, a prince who will become emperor, going out into the cold spring morning to gather food for someone he loves. Not a grand gesture, a small, cold, particular act. The snow on the sleeve, the continuing. The poem is the act, 31 syllables that are the same thing, as going into the field, as bending down in the snow, as filling the sleeves with the first green things. For you, the man who did not expect to be emperor, he was 55 years old. He had spent 30 years as a prince, in the margins of power, and then he was emperor, and then he died 3 years later. What he left, the reign, the cultural patronage, the poems, and this one poem in the 100 Poets, a man going into a cold field in the early spring when the snow was still falling to gather the first green things, For someone, this is the poem of the late bloomer, of the person who spent a long time in the quiet place and who did not emerge into the center until late, who did not have the years that the earlier emperors had, but who had the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time being grateful, who knew how to do things for other people, because he had not spent his life expecting things to be done for him. Kimi ga tame, haru no ni idete, wakana tsumu, waga koromo ni, yuki wa furitsutsu. For you, the spring field, the young herbs, the snow still falling on the sleeve, continuing